The hidden secrets in the DNA of today's Ashkenazi, Sephardic, and Mizrahi Jews. We've all heard the Bible stories. We know the names Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus. But here's the twist. Not all Jewish groups today share the same genetic connection to ancient Israel. From European intermarriage to Middle Eastern preservation to North African resilience, the truth is in the genes. Let's talk facts, not tradition, not assumptions, not religious art, just raw genetic data. Because when it comes to origins, DNA doesn't lie. But let's be honest, history might have. Now, all three groups trace their religious and historical identity back to the ancient Israelites. Living in the Middle East for millennia, they didn't experience the same level of migration, persecution, or intermarriage that Ashkenazi Jews did in Europe. Numerous genetic studies, including those from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and Yale, show that up to 50% or more of Ashkenazi DNA is European. A big part of that answer lies in European history, colonial influence, and modern geopolitics. The Jews portrayed in Hollywood films and documentaries, predominantly Ashkenazi. And if that's the case, why has this truth been hidden? DNA has no agenda. Let's break down one of the most influential yet misunderstood groups in Jewish history, the Ashkenazi Jews. There's been plenty of debate over their origins. Some have leaned into the Khazar theory, suggesting Ashkenazi Jews descended from a Turkic kingdom that converted to Judaism in the 8th or 9th century. Multiple peer-reviewed studies, including ones published in journals like Nature and Cell, show that only about 1.5% of Ashkenazi DNA can be traced back to Turkish or Central Asian populations. Roughly 39% of Ashkenazi Jewish DNA traces back to ancient Israelites. That's the Semitic root, the spiritual homeland. That's a huge revelation. And yet, here's where it gets powerful. Even with a lower percentage of Semitic DNA, Ashkenazi Jews have had an outsized influence on global Jewish thought, theology, and visibility. So what does this mean? If Ashkenazim, with less Israelite DNA, can shape the modern Jewish narrative, when people talk about Jewish history, it's usually framed around two poles: Ashkenazi dominance in the West and ancient Israel in the East, but also the rhythms of Iberia, North Africa, and the Arab world. A cultural and genetic blend that is as complex as it is beautiful. 18% North African and Arab ancestry, reflecting centuries of migration, trade, and even refuge in Muslim lands. And yes, about 19% prehistoric European DNA, which simply shows that even long before Rome, the Mediterranean was always a melting pot. Their legacy was nearly erased from European consciousness. But history, especially Western religious history, has a short memory. And now their descendants are rising. In Brazil, Mexico, and the American Southwest, echoes of Sephardic customs, Friday candle lighting, avoidance of pork, Hebrew symbols hidden in family heirlooms, are resurfacing after centuries underground. And that raises a powerful question. If Sephardic Jews, once stripped of their land, names, and visibility, can hold on to their identity through exile, persecution, and forced conversions. Because while empires fall, inquisitions fade, and cultures shift, God remembers who His people are. Let's talk about a group that almost never makes headlines, rarely gets mentioned in textbooks, and yet holds the strongest genetic connection to ancient Israel: the Mizrahi Jews. Full stop, no hype, no theory, just hard genetic data. In a world obsessed with ancestry kits, DNA tests, and where do you really come from conversations at Thanksgiving tables in suburban America, this is the real deal. But here's what's fascinating. While Ashkenazi Jews dominate cultural, political, and theological narratives in the West, Mizrahi Jews have lived largely in the shadows. Why aren't they household names like Golda Meir or Benjamin Netanyahu? Why aren't their stories taught in Western synagogues, seminaries, or schools? Why doesn't every major Jewish documentary start with the people who literally never left the region where Israel began? We have to admit that our dominant image of what a Jew looks like has been shaped more by European art and Hollywood casting than by ancient reality. These aren't speculative claims. These are peer-reviewed multinational studies using cutting-edge genome sequencing technology. Mizrahi Jews are living time capsules. Their blood carries the memory of the Exodus. Their culture echoes the Psalms. Their DNA sings the very melody of Israel's origin. Maybe it's time the world realized that the most ancient people in the Bible aren't in exile. They're still right there. And they always have been. Let's talk about something rarely mentioned in pulpits, ignored in most theological debates, and almost completely left out of mainstream conversations on ancestry and identity: the mothers. And the DNA proves it. How? It comes down to mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down exclusively through the mother. While Ashkenazi Jews have preserved Jewish tradition through incredible resilience, their maternal DNA tells a different story, and cultural identity remained more tightly protected. The maternal line stayed remarkably intact. Mothers who preserved language, mothers who lit Shabbat candles in secret, mothers who memorized Torah portions when scrolls were burned, mothers who protected identity when the world tried to erase it. Because from the very beginning, God's promises included women, not just as bearers of children, but as bearers of the covenant. Women have always carried the story, but modern narratives, especially Western ones, have ignored that. Ask them what they know about the mothers. Ask them what they know about the women who stayed rooted while others were scattered. Let's get real. This is where most people get uncomfortable. We've spent decades, even centuries, dancing around the issue, avoiding the question or drowning it in theological jargon. Does that mean one group is more authentic than the other? Let's break it down. It's not just about genetics, it's about preservation. Mizrahi Jews may have preserved the bloodline, but Ashkenazi Jews preserved the culture in exile. Every Jewish community, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, Ethiopian, has suffered. Each has faced exile, persecution, forced conversion, and generational trauma. Mizrahi Jews remind us of rootedness, the people who never left the land where the story began. In Israel, political tensions between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi Jews continue to shape government dynamics and cultural identity. So when someone asks, who's more Jewish, tell them this: we live in a culture where identity is currency, where ancestry kits like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA are bestsellers, where political platforms are shaped by questions of race, origin, and who gets to belong. And that distinction, it matters now more than ever, especially in America. But when it comes to God's story, the question isn't just who do you descend from, it's who are you becoming. What about the Mizrahi Jews, who carry the deepest Israelite DNA, but are invisible in most American synagogues and textbooks? This isn't just about ethnicity. This is about how America defines faith, power, and identity. Deuteronomy 7:7. The Lord did not set his affection on you, because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest. We've seen what happens when identity becomes a weapon instead of a window into someone's soul. Because in the end, God's covenant was never about who's most genetically Israelite. Whether you're Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Mizrahi, or not Jewish at all, if you believe in the God of Israel, you are part of his redemptive plan. So don't let labels, bloodlines, or ancestry kits define your worth. Like, share, subscribe, because this is just the beginning. The next chapter of your story starts now.